no nosso canal do YouTube. Ela está sendo gravada a partir de agora e vamos subir as gravações de todos os eventos, quase todos, no nosso canal do YouTube. Convido vocês a conhecer esse canal, porque tem muitos conteúdos, é uma biblioteca bem legal de eventos anteriores e de iniciativas que a gente faz aqui na ICF Brasil. É uma plataforma muito rica, de fato. Segundo recadinho, esse evento concede certificado de participação para os aqui letrados de ICF Continuing Coaching Education, os famosos CCUs em recursos, Resource Development. Mas a única forma de conseguir o certificado é completando um formulário, um pedido de certificado que a gente vai colocar no final do evento. Tá? A Márcia vai colocar aí no chat. Muito bem, a gente quer aproveitar também a mobilização dessa semana. Estou olhando aqui o número de participantes, 73 nesse momento, só neste evento. Tivemos mais de 2.000 inscrições, e a gente quer aproveitar esse momento para dizer que a gente está no Brasil. Vocês estão acompanhando, para quem não está no Brasil, talvez esteja acompanhando também. A gente tem um momento crítico acontecendo, uma crise humanitária no Rio Grande do Sul, e a gente está apoiando duas organizações, a Cruz Vermelha e a Acendendo Mentes, e a Márcia também está colocando aí no chat o Pix para quem puder ajudar essas organizações, e também contatos para conhecer o trabalho que eles vêm fazendo aí, tão bonito no Rio Grande do Sul, que a gente precisa tanto nesse momento. Né? Bastante urgente o que tá acontecendo, de fato, aqui no Brasil. Um outro recadinho, a gente lança toda a Semana Internacional de Coaching uma iniciativa de coaching pro bono para associações parceiras. Dessa vez a gente escolheu o Teto e também a AVSE. A gente vai oferecer coaching pro bono para lideranças sociais dessas organizações, principalmente que tem presença no Nordeste. Então, a Márcia também está colocando aí no chat um formulário para coaches que sejam associados da ICF e queiram oferecer 4 horas de coaching pro bono para essas organizações, tá bom? Então, mais um projeto aí da nossa pasta de responsabilidade social, que é tão importante para nós e que a gente tem dedicado bastante tempo e energia nessas iniciativas. E, por fim, último recadinho, gente, mais uma vez, obrigada pela paciência. O Steve vai fazer uma apresentação de mais ou menos 30 minutos, 20 minutos, mas a gente quer também ouvir comentários de vocês e convidamos vocês a colocarem suas perguntas no chat a qualquer momento. A gente vai tentar respondê-las todas mais para o final do nosso evento. Então, por favor, quanto mais vocês puderem comentar e interagir, mais interessante vai ficar esse nosso encontro. Márcia, esqueci de alguma coisa? Ufa!
Não, tudo certo.
Tudo certo? Okay, so the time has come. I'm going to introduce our special guest for today. Steve has a career in change consulting and leadership development, spanning 30 years. He supports and challenges clients to find their edge and stretch. Love that. When what they are after is more than simply better sameness. I can relate to that. He was co-chair of the Organization Development Network Europe for 3 years and is currently a council member and trustee for the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. For the past 4 years, he has been researching and writing a book on how leaders and organizations continue to look for silver bullet solutions to complex problems. The more complex the challenge, the greater the need to find someone, anyone, who can offer a solution, and preferable, a guarantee, quick one. So, Steve, the floor is yours. I can also give a word about our relationship. We first met a couple of years ago when we were part of the same supervision certification program at the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. And I can say that considering the Tavistock approach, which is system psychodynamics and Gestalt and a lot of experiential learning, Steve probably experienced myself as very vulnerable, and he knows a lot of my shadows and my shames and everything that we experience when we are in this kind of program as the Tavistock Institute offers. So Steve, it's a pleasure to have you here. The floor is yours, and I hope you all enjoy a very provocative session, as I see Steve, a thought provocateur. Right, Steve?
Lovely. Thank you, Camilla. So thank you for a lovely introduction, and delighted to meet you all. So in the interest of getting through this, because I want to, if nothing else, leave you thinking. As you would expect from the title of this session, there will be no easy answers, no silver bullets, no quick fixes on off at the end of it. So essentially what I want to talk to you today about is fragility and our relationship as consultants, as coaches, as helpers to our clients, in terms of how we collude with our clients, in terms of offering them solutions often that have very little basis in reality. So what's coming? I'm going to tell you why I wrote the book. I'm then going to frame the territory in which I'm exploring. I'll offer you some of the key themes from the book, a bit of focus on practice, and of course some questions that you can throw at me on the way or at the end. So some of you may know of a Dutch organisation called the Corporate Rebels. A few years ago, I met them in 2013, and the two founders, Pim and Hust, who left their corporate jobs behind in search of how to make organisations more productive, healthier and happier. I met them at a holacracy event in Brighton, where I live, and I hosted them twice at the Roffey Park Institute in the UK. The second time I hosted them, and bear in mind the audience was full of people like you and me, very experienced coaches, very experienced consultants, experienced in organisational development and change. And at one point during this session, one of the corporate rebels said to the audience, "We started our journey 2 years ago, and we thought at the end of it we'd find the magic bullet. We'd find the silver bullet to organisational challenges. And we realised there isn't one." That didn't surprise me. That was not the surprise. What hooked me was that the audience 2 or 3 times after that responded in a way where they were asking the corporate rebels, but there is one really, isn't there? There must be. It's almost as if intellectually they knew that there was not an easy answer or a silver bullet, but they still were behaving as if there were. And that's what got me really interested in how is it that people who really understand intellectually that there is no such thing as a silver bullet or a quick fix for complex problems still behave as if there is. So our profession, our practices as coaches and consultants, indeed the entire field of management has been created on the basis in the belief of problems and the existence of problems. If you didn't have a problem, as Stefan Cantore, who's a leadership academic, says, why would you need managers or leaders? And I would suggest, why would you need consultants or coaches or experts? We only exist because our clients and we construe that there are problems. So when we're talking about problems here, and when I'm talking about silver bullets, I'm talking specifically about complex challenges. I'm talking about the mess of reality in organizations. I'm not talking about complicated challenges where you can unplug a computer server and plug in a new one and it all works. I'm talking about leadership behaviors, culture, unexpected events that cause us to wrestle with reality, such as global pandemics. When we are dealing with the mess of reality, how is it that we still look for quick fixes and simple solutions? And just to say that this idea of silver bullet, I know doesn't always translate into all cultures. In many cultures, though, there is this idea of the weapon or the thing that will slay the mythical beast that threatens us all. This is the metaphor of the silver bullet. It's the thing that is guaranteed to succeed in banishing or eradicating the thing that is causing us so much discomfort and pain. The problem here is that, as David Westall here said, that models, methodologies, processes, or even consultants serve as a psychological support for the denizens of corporate land, much in the same way as teddy bears or security blankets provide 3-year-olds with a sense of security that serves to facilitate emotional development. And I'm going to talk more about this, how much all these ideas are essentially ways of managing anxiety. And this is going to become a crucial part of what I talk to you about. So, lurking in here is a fundamental question. What drives the need for certainty? What drives the need for certainty in clients? What drives the need for certainty in us as practitioners when we meet a client and we really want to be of service? So I'm just going to ask you a question. If you wouldn't mind in chat, what drives your need for certainty? What drives your clients' need for certainty? Just in the chat, put in a few immediate responses to that question, and let's just see what thoughts are in the group. And I will just pause for a moment, but let those come in. Lovely, Hermione, our brain. Yeah. The need for control, safety. Some of you have read my book, I think. But obviously, these are things that we know this to be true. These are part of the human condition. It's very familiar to us. Lovely. So keep those coming in and just see what you as a group see as these things. So during my research, I interviewed 30 or 40 people, and I'm going to just play you one short extract from one person I interviewed, and then I'll share with you some of the other responses to this question from the people I interviewed. Mark Cole is the author of a book called Radical OD, and also books on power and voice and silence in organizations. A very interesting man. So just a very brief clip from Mark.
Steve, we can hear the sound.
Ah, you can't hear it?
No, I suggest you to stop sharing, then you share back, but you click on the box, you know, sharing the sound or something like that on Zoom. I don't remember. I don't remember exactly. What?
There is that sense of...
Bear with me one second.
Yeah, it's working now. It's working now. Thank you.
It allows particularly senior to get down that. So again, I guess, and this is off the top of my head, I've not thought about this, but OD allows particularly senior...
I'm just going to get it back to that point again. Right.
I think it's the fiction of fixability. I think if you're working in an ideological space where the expectation of you, particularly as a senior leader, the expectation is that you will get stuff fixed and you will be judged on the basis of that, you know, whether you do it or don't, then you're quickly looking around for...
Sorry, so my computer is causing problems. So I'm going to stop there because I don't want to delay. You've got the sense of it. It's this idea of the myth of fixability. Some of the other factors that arose during my research, the expectations that we place on ourselves, but the expectations that we have of leaders, the expectations of stakeholders, of our peers, of the people we employ. I'll give you one little example of this. There's some research from 1997 by an American psychologist that revealed that the thing that 19 out of 20 senior executives feared the most was their employees discovering how inadequate they felt. So that's how powerful the expectations can be in terms of what that evokes in people. The pace at which we operate, the sheer speed which clients and organizations and leaders are expected to solve problems means they often look to people and they accept offers from people who can say, yes, we can fix this for you very quickly. There's the archetypes of great leaders or good leadership. You know, we're still addicted, particularly to notions of heroic leadership. even though much of the evidence is that heroic leadership does more damage than good in organisations and arguably in society more widely. There is this thing that Mark alluded to there, this myth of fixability, which is actually founded on some quite lazy assumptions about the nature of change. The idea that change, and particularly complex problems, can be fixed by going through a set sequence of steps in a particular order, that if I do this, then that will happen. This kind of binary thinking, that talks to the myth of fixability. There's fear and anxiety. What if people discover how inadequate I feel? And that can evoke shame. And the unconscious patterns of shame will become quite important to what I talk about. There's the inability at an existential level of not being able to cope with not knowing what to do in face of reality. And there's the need to please. The need to please, our peers, our colleagues, and arguably, unconsciously, whoever it is in our life previously we imagine we need to please. The displacement of anxiety. If we employ somebody else, if they're bringing in this silver bullet, then we're just displacing onto them all responsibility for what happens now. And then all of this results in a cognitive overload. If I'm overloaded, of course I'm going to reach for the thing that looks like it's going to take the pain away. Why wouldn't I? Some of the psychological factors here that I'm just going to touch on briefly. There's things like nature at the neurobiological level. There's the whole nurture bit, our families, the entanglements from our childhood and the family systems we were part of. Social and cultural forces around us, the extent to which outside of us there is a narrative about how we can control our fates, or whether there's acceptance of actually having to deal with the complexity and uncertainty of life. And that is then ties into these ideals of omniscience and omnipotence. The idea that we can be all controlling and all knowing, which is totally absurd. Ego and identity. So our self-image as a leader or as a consultant. Now, what's my self-image as a coach? What pressure do I put on myself as a coach to be this perfect practitioner? Narcissism and shame, and then anxiety as well. And this is all a recipe for creating shadows. And I love Chris Agiris's comment from 1980. These are all face-saving games, essentially. We do this to defend against anxiety. They become undiscussable, and then their undiscussability becomes undiscussable in and of itself. Particularly when we're talking about shame, it is very difficult to talk about that. So which brings us to a key part of the book. Dr. Graham Curtis from Roffey Park, his PhD is on something he describes as functional collusion. So processes which people engage in to avoid uncomfortable emotions such as shame. We all participate in the maintenance of patterns of relating that themselves emerge unbidden and undiscussed from ongoing relating between interdependent people. In simple terms, these are unconscious patterns of behavior driven by shame and anxiety that inform the decision-making processes. And this was a key part of the evolution of my thinking as I got really interested in, well, how is it, even though we know there is no such thing as a silver bullet, we still act or behave as if there is one? Where this shows up? In leadership development, for example. It shows up in something like the UK and the NHS. In a King's Fund report, which is a research institute, in 2011, there was a list of all the reports over 50 years showing all of these reports suggesting different models of leadership that were going to be the answer for the NHS in the UK. And only this year, a few months ago, they released this, the new well-led framework, which again tells us nothing that we don't already know, but is another way of attempting to codify, this is the answer to all the problems we have in this organization. So leadership development as a field has a lot to answer for. One of the things I talk about in the book is how often leadership development has become quite simply performative. Learners turn up to perform the role of learners. We as consultants and facilitators perform our role to impart knowledge and ideas, and both go away believing that they've actually done the work. That's not the same thing as working with the messy reality of their work context. Last year, in the first 6 months of 2023, if you did a search on an academic search engine, there were over 10,000 papers written by that point on leadership development that year. Well, that's just 6 months. If we haven't found the answer yet, maybe there isn't one when it comes to leadership development. Business schools and executive education. Well, Martin Parker, who's an interesting man from the university in the southwest of the UK, his suggestion is very much that the problem is down to the very nature of business schools, that they are still wedded to the idea there's one way of organising, namely market managerialism. And that the best approach would be to bulldoze all business schools and replace them with schools for organising, because there are many more ways of organising than market managerialism. And business schools and executive education have become more and more orientated to selling the product and ensuring they can carry on selling the product than actually to moving away from a form of performative learning. If you look at how hard they market themselves, it becomes quite clear that that's the case. Gurus and thought leaders. Now, Simon Sinek does some great stuff, and there's some really interesting work that he does. But the problem with thought leaders is that they often speak in simple language. They use juxtapositions wherever possible, and always frame things as simple binary concepts, or they rehash well-established ideas already. The whole thought leadership industry actually emerged from the consulting business and the consulting industry. It is problematic in and of itself. If we never actually see thought leaders disabusing clients of the fact that they may not have the answer. They are always presenting as if they have got the answer in a very certain term. We are colluding in that, in believing that thought leaders have the answer. So one quote I quite liked is from one academic was, not everyone can be a thought leader, because if everyone is challenging the status quo, there is no status quo to challenge. Theories and methodologies, something like ProSci. Notice the certainty with which methodologies are sold. This will give participants the knowledge, skills, and tools to drive successful change initiatives, no matter how complex or urgent. My own experience of working in organisations with ProSci is that organisations typically buy it in with the expectation it will fix change problems, and are surprised when it doesn't often. The language reveals, again, in terms of how they market it, just how much there is a narrative about selling certainty. It's proven. It's change ready. Change is exhilarating. Are you ready? Playing into the anxiety of the clients and the leaders. Pace, agility, flexibility. There's all the buzzwords. Get really good at change. I'm still not quite sure how you get really good at change. You can live and work and play in it and lead through it, but getting really good at it. And success, you then see succeed. So it's all about playing on anxieties and selling certainty. The big consulting firms are predicated on finders, minders, and grinders model. The entire industry requires fungible junior consultants to be deployed. The number of former consultants from big firms I interviewed who said that they had left their profession because they were either close to being burnt out, or were so disillusioned at continually being asked not to build capability, but rather to sell certainty and sell in more bodies, was striking. The entire consulting industry has got an ethical problem, in my view. It builds codependency. There's a psychological splitting. We split off and we give the consultant the responsibility for fixing things. There's significant ethical questions. I also believe it talks to a systemic dysfunction that we're all part of. And there's little room for contrarianism. And there's a kind of pure functional collusion to how consultancies often work with organizations. One organization I know a few years ago, at one moment in time, was working with over 10 consultancies at the same moment. And they had gone through all the major consultancies in the UK. And they were still in this dependent relationship. And lastly, we get to the fields of practice. And in terms of fields of practice, what's interesting about fields of practice, of which coaching is one, organisational development is one, there is not actually a dictionary definition for fields of practice. So in an organisational context, we have a variety of fields. We have HR, organisational development, org design, change management, and your own, the coaching arena. To my mind, much of this is about different groups of people who identify as particular professions or particular practices coming together to learn and to ascribe to themselves a particular identity. So we end up with fields of practice as a way of describing specialized areas within what we decide are discrete professions. We've decided this. And it sets a context for where people with particular skills and disciplines both can validate their practices and connect. Now, if we look at how, for example, coaching here, and I'm using the ICF as an example of how, and I see this with the OD community I'm very associated with. Again, notice the language that we adopt. We're here to ensure, there's that language of certainty. Leverage, again, that's implying that there's something that we have some element of control. The playing to the identity of setting ourselves apart. Best practices, which I have to say, the notion of best practices is actually really problematic when it comes to human change. And cutting edge, again, the language of putting ourselves at the forefront. So notice here the elevation of a particular practice into a status, which then will tell our clients that we have the expertise and we have the answers. And ultimately, fields of practice are thought collectives. This is an idea that comes from an academic called Carl Weick. Thought collectives are dominated by particular thought styles. These are the things we all agree on that bind us together. Part of the challenge here is when a thought collective comes into being, so does what it means to be a heretic. My question to you in the coaching community is, what would it be undiscussable or heretical to say in a meeting of ICF colleagues? And there you will get close to what is at the edge of what it is allowable to say within your community. So it's also telling to my mind that many of the fields of practice, there is no conversation about them joining. There's continual conversation about how they are distinct from each other. And I'm not sure whether that serves our clients. What it does do is it reasserts our identity as experts. So this brings us to practice. The research shows that what clients believe they're buying are three things. They're looking for, above all else, experts, in this case, a furry mammal that is very good with wood, with an expertise, namely the ability to gnaw trees and chop them down, and thirdly, with the ability to construct bespoke solutions. That's what the research shows that clients typically are most interested in finding. Above all else, they're after the expert. They want the expert in chewing down trees, or the expert in coaching, or the expert in change. So this begs the question, what are each of you an expert in? Okay, so I'm just going to ask you in the chat, if I was your potential client, tell me, what are you an expert in? And just put that in the chat. And let's see what expertise we have within this space to get a sense of how we identify here. So I'd be really interested just into chat to hear that briefly. Good, I'm still on time. I'm just going to see what's going in chat. Anybody willing to think dialogue? Excellent. Thanks, Morad. Angela, I love that. An expert in fear. We should talk, Angela. I'd love to meet an expert in fear. So brilliant. So here we have all these things we hope and believe we're expert in. If I speak for myself, my own anxiety, I recognize in myself the part of me that does want to skip ahead to the part where I'm awesome and where I'm brilliant. I love it when clients give me a stroke and tell me how good I am or how clever I am. But I've increasingly become deeply suspicious of that. I'm deeply suspicious of when a client tells me I'm an expert, or they introduce me as, God forbid, a thought leader. I really do not like the phrase thought leader used in relation to me. And there's a number of reasons for that. So I just want to touch on this idea that there might be an unholy trinity at play for all of us. Firstly, there's our ego. Who do I take myself to be as a practitioner? Now, that's made up of my self-images. In my case, that's as a consultant, as a facilitator, and I recognize, and as a supervisor, I have my ideal image of how I should be as a supervisor. What happens when I don't meet up to those ego ideals and those images? That can evoke shame in me. And I'm familiar with shame, both at a kind of personal life level and in the work workplace context. And how do I then defend against my feelings of shame? The processes of narcissism here, narcissism, there is healthy narcissism, but the process by which we then manipulate our environment to maintain these ego ideals and these self-images then is a third part of this. If I'm a leader that fears being found out, what might I do to defend against that? How might this manifest in practice? Well, from work with a colleague and friend, Simon Cavicchia, who was deeply influential in the book, we would suggest there's a pervasive anxiety about not being good enough. I'm not a good enough coach. I'm not a good enough consultant, which feeds my self-doubt. There's also the tendency to judge myself and to judge others. I recognize in myself sometimes when I'm really frustrated with my client work, a clue that I'm not in my best place is why I think to myself, why can't they just grow up? Something's going on for me. There's a grandiosity as a defense against the above. I start to believe that my expertise is the thing that will keep me safe. If I lean on my expertise, I can keep at bay the anxiety of potentially a client not thinking that I'm good enough to help them. There's also linked to that the preoccupation with appearing good in others' eyes. And that means both clients and peers. To what extent do I feel I need to look good in the eyes of my fellow coaches within a community? And then perfectionism, being the perfect consultant, the perfect helper. In practice, how might that manifest? Preoccupation with status, to live up to those ego ideals. The denial of my vulnerability. Again, heroic leadership, then showing up within practice. The idea of the consultant as savior or the coach as savior is seductive. There's the intoxication of the client projections, as I've touched on before. What happens also when we are scared that we might actually upset our clients? Do we avoid anything that might risk a rupture? So a question for all of you to chew on is, what would you do when faced with the possibility that you need to speak a truth to the client that might risk the relationship and your income? Will you challenge or will you go there? There's the defense against superiority. How do I feel if my clients don't get what I'm talking about? How am I, is that about me or is it about them? Then there's the deeper shadows around gender, race, sexuality, identity, religion, faith, all of that stuff. And in terms of certainly my experience of many fields of practice, we talk about reflective practice, but we avoid going really deep into it, to really talk about our shame as practitioners, as human beings. My concern is that often we ask our clients to go to places that we're not prepared to go ourselves. That's been my observation in some contexts. And my suggestion to us all as practitioners, whether you describe yourself as a coach, consultant, or whatever, is we have our dark caves. And there are things in our dark caves that we'd really rather not talk about and acknowledge. But without going into our dark caves, how possibly can we ask our clients to go anywhere that we have not been ourselves? The kinds of questions I'd invite you to think about in your own practice that talks to our potential fragility is, what is in your cave? How does that manifest for good or ill in your practice? I'm the son of an alcoholic. My father was a great man in many respects, but he was incredibly challenging and difficult to be around. My ability to read the room at a non-verbal level with clients is entirely due, or largely due down to my experience as a child around the dinner table with an alcoholic parent. That is in my shadow and in my cave, but I've worked with that to integrate it into my practice. That talks to my relationship with shame as well. How have I worked with that so that I don't feel the shame of my childhood? I'm able to use that experience. And what happens when your fragility meets that of the client? I think it's very difficult for us as practitioners to talk about our fragility with a client that we know well and we trust. I would suggest it's impossible to talk about our fragility with a client that we don't know well. I don't have any silver bullets, just suggestions. I think there's a need for reflexivity rather than reflective practice solely on its own. There needs to be a fundamental rethinking of what we mean by internal capability and less of a reliance on external parties to provide that. We need to evolve our thinking and think radically about the institutions, whether they be the institutions that are to do with the fields of practice or business schools. We need to get comfortable with being wrong. I make a thing of really focusing on when I'm wrong and owning it and naming it. It's very rare to hear leaders say, I'm wrong. How often do we as consultants and practitioners say to our clients, I'm wrong? We need to own our fragility and inquire some more with each other and with ourselves, which requires curiosity at a deep level and a willingness to experiment. Now, the last thing I want to do is just read you a short extract from the book that sums up the cost of all this. This was a story told to me by a consultant from the UK, now based in the US. And he told me the story. Shortly before COVID hit in 2019, this consultant was invited by the CEO of a major US retail organization to become their VP of Global Trends for 2 years, to see through the organization's response to the growing threat posed by Amazon. Despite the attractive offer, the consultant respectfully declined. What then emerged was the real story. In the previous 2 years prior to the CEO's arrival, this organization had spent $200 million on digital transformation with a global consulting firm. This had failed. So another global professional services firm was engaged, and a further $400 million was spent. The CEO told the consultant that in the first year the consultants came in, they made lots of promises. And the next year, the new consultant similarly came in and struggled to deliver. At this point, the consultant inquired why the client did not sue the consulting firms, or at the very least try to recoup a portion of the money spent. The answer? There'll be a backlash. I can't sue the people I brought in because I'm tethered to them. I said, well, that sounds ridiculous. That means there's zero accountability. He said that it's like hush money, because if they fail, you can't sue them for not delivering because you were the one who signed the checks and brought them in. That plus the CEO believed it would mean he would never work at a senior level again if he took on one of the major consulting firms for a failure to deliver. It served both parties to keep the failure a secret and hidden, if possible, to protect both their reputations. When the consultant asked the CEO whether he'd carried out a post-mortem, his response was, no, I'm not going to do that. Why would I document my failures? And there you have the cost of functional collusion. And there's a number you can put to it. In that instance, $600 million. The anxiety of opening a conversation about what might we learn from our failures and our fragility was greater than writing off $600 million. This is why we need to get more curious and more willing to explore our caves and to work with our own shame and anxiety as practitioners, with each other and ultimately with our clients. And I will stop there.
Taking my time here, Steve, because when you speak, it's just like I need an hour to settle down and think of there's so many food for thought here, and it's very bold and provocative and necessary kind of critical thing. We as coaches, not only coaches, because research shows that we are a community, have at least 3 other roles in our lives, professional lives, such as consulting, mentor, facilitators, and things like that. So, wow. Yeah, but I have the role here. Let me come back to my role today. And we have some comments and questions in the chat. And Marcia, help me out because I'm going to pick some of them, but you can pick others. People are relating to your comments. I think Fermina mentioned
I'll pick up a couple.
that.
So Tamara, yes,
Yeah.
Functional collusion. It's an unusual term, but the key thing here is these are collusive behaviors. They are unconscious and they are profoundly functional because they are actually working to enable these unconscious patterns of behaviors to work incredibly well. So that's why it's a functional collusion. Jose, who's cheating who? Or I would say less cheating, more avoiding, maybe deluding, maybe pretending, maybe scared. It's a mixture of things. Sorry, just to say with the rider that I do suggest that in some areas and in some instances there's and I do look at the large professional services firms as an example here. Some of the stories I heard are deeply troubling from an ethical and moral stance. And if it is not cheating, then it is certainly in an adjacent space. It's problematic.
There is a question here from Juliana. Sorry. What would be our responsibility as coaches in this expectation of certainty demanded by the market or the clients?
Great question. My own take, let's think about that. Well, there's an interesting question as to who your client is. If it's a one-to-one client and you are simply working with a coaching client, that's different to if you have a three-way relationship with an organization as well. So in that context, what expectations of certainty and what is at play in a parallel context within the client system? So I'd be interested in that. With my own supervision and coaching clients, I'm really upfront and clear with my clients about what I am able and not able to do. And I'm really clear and upfront about with them in terms of my assumptions about the nature of change and what is possible and what is not. So one of the risks for coaches, in my own experience, and I've felt this, is we sometimes get invited in unconsciously to coaching our clients so that they can succeed. You know, I'm going to coach you for success. I think that's one of the traps, is to watch out whether you're being invited into a place where you're being expected to help them succeed. I tend to say to my clients, it's entirely up to you to define what success is. I'm utterly agnostic. I don't really mind at all. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my immediate response.
And when as far as I understood, you were focusing more on the question related to a one-to-one, like a private client. But when the organization is at play and we have three parties in the relationship, then how would you respond to this question?
I had it recently where I was coaching somebody who was in very challenging circumstance with the organization, and I had to be very clear with the client. My client is the coaching client, and whether you get the outcome you want, I can't guarantee that. So there's something here about boundary management and being really clear about the question it is you're being asked to answer, and also being prepared to walk away if the client is asking you to do something that is not ethical and is not possible. So there's something here also about the unconscious psychological processes and the parallel processes. The number of times I noticed that the anxiety with my primary client, the coaching client, is mirrored by the anxiety that's going on in their relationship with their boss or whoever they're working with. And there's another layer of parallel process going on in the wider system as well.
Thank you. Can I?
There's another.
There are a lot of questions. Fermina has a question. In the global environment we live today, we have to deal with different cultural biases in the workplace. Any research you recommend about the main cultural differences regarding this? She says, I coach some expats working in Brazil, and this would be so helpful. There's
nothing that I've got immediately to my mind. There's one or two things I can probably pull out, and I'm happy to pass that on to you, Marcia, if you can then share it with people here.
Okay.
But you know, I agree with you totally. In the global north, my part of the world, we have a real problem with our arrogance in assuming that what works in the global north and the way we see leadership in organizations is appropriate in other cultural contexts. And it's not. So I wholeheartedly agree, Femina. We need to do lots more work with that.
Okay, great. One from Beatrice Facchini. Together with the need of certainty, I usually find people are struggling with making too much effort in a world where the main theme is you can get whatever you want, whenever you want it, without any effort. What's your view on this? Thank you.
Yeah, that talks to entitlement and maybe privilege. So if I speak from I hold at least 4 of the cards of privilege. I'm white, I'm middle-aged, I'm straight, I'm middle class. And, I recognize I have those aspects of privilege.
In a developed country, may I say.
And absolutely, that's the 5th one. Yeah. And there are others as well. My own view is this talks to a number of things. There's a really long answer we haven't got time for, but in the things that spring to my mind is this thing about being comfortable with being wrong. We need to really work harder at just noticing when we are wrong and acknowledging it. The second thing is notice how we are continually being asked to either be for or against something. It's no longer possible to be ambivalent or hold a nuanced position. So, you can't have everything in life. That's a kind of a nuanced position. So the ask of us as coaches and practitioners of change, which is what we all are essentially, is I would suggest we all need to get more comfortable with ambivalence and nuance and not knowing. We need to model this for our clients. Because if we can't do it, then I question whether or not we're being of service to them with some of the more challenging things they're facing.
Anything else, Camila? I gave you some time to think now.
Well, there's a statement from Zhao there. I hope I pronounced your name, Zhao. It's all about being authentic. It is, but it's a lovely example of how we need to really think a little bit more deeply sometimes with our language. So, what do we all mean by authentic? So I guarantee you would not have wanted the authentic me on Monday morning, having driven 12 hours from Germany with my mother in the back of the car from a family reunion, having not had enough sleep, faced with a long train journey to go to another client engagement in the north of the UK. I was a very grumpy man on Monday morning. So I could have given you my authentic self then. How much authenticity do we really want? If we all met face to face, do you want me to share all my personal judgments and values in all contexts? So actually talking about what we mean by things to better understand our similarities and differences is part of the work proper. You're right, Zhao, you can. It's although there's, Zhao just said that you can share that you're not in your best moment. I think what I'm picking up here is that not with you, but out there, if you read LinkedIn, often there's a call for authentic leadership without actually unpacking what is meant by authentic in human terms.
There is a question from Patricia. What can we do to change a marketplace? Who initiate the commercial conversation?
Oh, great question.
Asking what will be the results of the project.
What can we do to change the marketplace? Initiate commercial. So when a client says to you, what are you going to do for me? I think that's the question, isn't it? Yeah. My response, and there's a chapter in this. There's some of you may know him, but Richard Claydon, who's based in Singapore, talks about the idea of dirty consulting. So a clean consultant will come in with a nice suit and a very nice slide deck, lots of models, and tell the client, here's the answer, here's all the solutions, and they will sell the certainty. A dirty consultant will come in and say, well, I don't know what the problem is, and you don't know what the problem is. Well, if we sit down with a number of your people and we have a conversation together, we might work out what the problem is. So the first thing we need to do is not to collude with our clients when we don't have the answer. So I had a group say to me a few years ago at the beginning of 2 days, why should we listen to you, Steve? And I laughed. I didn't intend to laugh. That was my immediate response. And I said, well, you shouldn't. I said, I know some stuff. I've got a few questions. I had some experiences, but you shouldn't listen to me just because I happen to be here. So again, this talks to our fragility. How comfortable are we in acknowledging to our clients what we don't know, when it may mean that we don't get the work? So if you look at my website, my business one of the things I say on it very clearly is, make me redundant. That would be my response to that question.
Okay. There is one question, I mean, many comments and some questions. There is this need to control change and a constant pursuit of change, and this creates a lot of anxiety. In the end, our human essence is still the same. So I sometimes wonder if we should give change such a prominent role instead of getting to really know oneself and starting from there. What do you think about?
Oh, nice question. Nice question, Beatrice. Can we stay on for another hour? Because you've got really good questions. These are really good questions.
This is from Lenora.
Can I change the narrative?
It's not here.
It's okay. So here's the uncomfortable one for all of us. So this is my answer to this. I'm not saying you all do this. Really clear, right? I decided 6 years ago, once I'd worked out what clients really valued in how I work, that I would show up in a way where it was really clear who I was and how I worked. And if they didn't like it, that was fine. If they liked it, that was fine. So in English, we have this thing called Marmite. It's a very strong tasting spread. And in England, you either like it or you hate it. And that is how I present what I do. I want to be really clear with my potential clients. Look, if you want help and you want me to work with you, this is how we do it. This is how I show up. Are you up for it? And if they are, brilliant. If they're not, I'm really okay with that. So there's something here about, as practitioners, really being comfortable in your own skin and making it clear what you stand for and how you work, and not pretending to your clients that you're something you're not. You can't be like every other coach. So who are you as a coach and consultant? What will they get from you that they will get that no one else can give in that precise flavor? That's how I respond to it.
Camila,
this is great,
do we have time?
Yeah, we don't have an hour now, okay? But you are already invited to come back, Steve. But the audience, the participants here can also reach to Steve at any time. You can leave your contact here, Steve, if you want. He has a great ongoing supervision practice, and I'll be part of the next cohort, the online cohort. So I'm not meaning to, sell anything here, but I'm just sharing some practice that is, for me, is essential for my own development. So do reflexivity or reflex practice your own and ongoing, as an ongoing practice. So that's my suggestion. I also highly recommend his book. I'm halfway through, Steve. You have so many references there, so I kept, stopping and going to the reference. So maybe I would take like a year to read. I think that's the idea, just digesting, right? So thank you so much all for being here, and it was an amazing, productive session. And I hope you can come back, and you can be also here in Brazil.
I'd love to. Yeah.
You are more than welcome.
Thank you all. Thank you for your great questions.
Please, yeah, and you have a minute to do your final considerations if you like. Thank you.
No, just a thank you, and go well, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And also just I have 2 places left on the virtual program, so if me and Camilla haven't scared you off and you're interested, it's a practice supervision program, so by all means drop me a line. There's 2 places left for the one that starts online next month.
Thank you, Steve. Márcia acabou de colocar de novo o formulário para solicitação de certificados. Então, esse é o único jeito de conseguir o certificado. Então, por favor, quem tiver interessado, é só clicar aí no link no chat. There are a lot of messages here, Steve, thanking you. And so, all the best, take care. And I see you soon. At 10:30, we have another session on AI and coaching. So you are more than welcome to participate, okay? See you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
All the
you.
best.
Bye.
Tchau, gente. Obrigada.
Tchau.
Cheerio. Bye.
Thanks, Steve.